Well, it's the season for commencement exercises and graduation speeches. Just curious, how many of you remember who spoke at your graduation? Raise your hand. That's what I thought. A couple of you. I always feel sorry for the people who are invited to speak at graduations because usually they're the only ones listening to themselves. They've fretted and worked, they've written and rewritten, fine-tuned, and they have labored over that speech, and more often than not, it falls on deaf ears. And I can almost guarantee you that the majority of us can't even name that person who spoke at our graduation. Some of you just graduated last week even, and you didn't raise your hands. So very few people attend a graduation for the purpose of hearing a commencement address. It's just something that you have to endure before you get the diploma, right? Yeah. They go because someone they love is being honored, and that's the idea there. I've heard a lot of graduation speeches in my day, but the most necessary message for a successful life, which is usually what those speeches kind of revolve around, the most necessary message for a successful life for graduates and all of us today is a talk on priorities. Last year on Graduate Sunday, I pled with our students to not graduate from church. And this morning, I want to urge them and you to have the correct and right priorities in your life. I'm convinced that we suffer most of our heartaches in our relationships and our finances and every other area of our life because of misplaced priorities. We deem what is valuable in our eyes over what God believes is valuable or what God says is valuable. A few years ago, several of my friends and I attended a pastor's conference where late one evening we were all sitting in a hotel lobby talking about life and ministry. One of the men that I look up to in the ministry, Mark Thomas, a church planter in Colorado who has been here over the past couple of months, he was amongst us, and he has many more years of ministry experience than all of us combined. So he took the opportunity to impart some wisdom to us that evening. He said this: God, your wife, your children, and then the church. God, your wife, your children, and then the church. That must be the order of your priorities in your life. If you move, misplace, or forget one of those on the list, I can guarantee you your life will go sour. I've seen it happen too often. God, your wife, your children, and then the church. Priorities is something that we ought to talk a lot more of. When Rachel and I first got married, we lived in this very small duplex. It had leopard print cabinets. It was high dollar, let me believe. It was rough. But honestly, it was just this very, very small apartment duplex kind of setting. And Rachel still had one more year of college, and I was working all hours of the day, and she worked a part-time job herself. And so from time to time, much to Rachel's chagrin and hard work, the house got a little bit cluttered, and whenever we were having people over, we would do this real fast 20-minute, I say deep cleaning. It was not deep cleaning session before people got in, right? On one occasion, probably the first time that this happened, we said, okay, ready, break, 20 minutes, we're going to get back. Our guests are going to be here, so let's hurry up and do this. I get like 3 rooms done. That was pretty much all our apartment was 3 rooms. And I come back into one of the rooms, and Rachel had organized and labeled and perfectly organized a closet. And I thought, Rachel, the closet is the thing that you throw stuff in, close the door, so your guests don't think anything about it. You gotta get your priorities right. We've got our priorities right about our cleaning sometimes, and I'm joking. You need to have a clean closet. No, you don't. You got to have your priorities right and all that, but in your life, our priorities must be set in order. So Brother Mark was trying to relay to a young preacher boy several years ago, God, your wife, your children, and then the church. That must be the order, the procession of order of your priorities in your life. That's the biblical order of priorities, by the way, and it's how our life is lived most harmoniously. You want things to fit correctly in your life? You've got to get them in the correct order. The beauty of that order, God, spouse, children, and then the church, is that they coincide so well. Here's what I mean by that. I can worship God by serving my wife. I can worship God by loving my kids, by working in the church. I can do all of those things and worship God through them. There might be seasons of life where we spend more time maybe at the church than I do at the home. There might be seasons of change like that, but those need to be short seasons. There might be slight exceptions in some cases, but they are definitely the exception and not the rule. It was some of the most sound and helpful advice that I've ever received. And before we get into Nehemiah chapter 10, where the children of Israel are setting right their priorities, I want to talk a little bit about that list. God, your spouse, your children, and then the church. When I'm going through a particularly strained moment in my life, almost without exception, guess what has happened? One of those has moved, one of those has been misplaced or forgotten on that list. I have put precedence over one that ought not be. God, Rachel, the girls, or New Hope. Church and work, let's talk about that. Mark Thomas, several years ago, when he gave me that piece of advice, he was talking to us in ministry who had jobs at the church. He later said that he teaches his congregation the same list of priorities with work being last. God, spouse, children, church, job. That order probably seems crazy to most, especially to put your job that low on the priority list. But I've seen many reap the benefits of living their life in that order, he said. Spouse and children. Just about every secular parenting book will teach you that the parent's primary responsibility is to the child. But I want to challenge that. I have great parents. They have sacrificed a lot for me and my brother and sister throughout the years. Honestly, I cannot remember a game where they were not there. They were not in attendance and cheering loudly or arguing at the refs loudly for me. And with all three of us playing sports, 3 sports a year, that is no small feat. But the best thing that my parents ever did for me was that they showed us kids that they loved each other. Was there an argument that we shouldn't have overheard, but we heard from time to time? There was. But even then, they remained respectful and loving towards each other. And by doing so, they taught us by example how to disagree lovingly. Something that we do not get in this world today. There was never a time that I was worried about the security of their relationship in our home. That, parents, is the greatest gift you can give your child or your children, is to love your spouse. I strongly believe, and I knew that my parents loved me because I saw that the love that they had for each other. I think that God, spouse, children, church is the correct way to live your life, and while that list might not be written word for word in Nehemiah chapter 10, the whole chapter deals with the Israelites putting God as their top priority of their lives. Nehemiah chapter 9 closed with the children of Israel gathered in the square, the town hall as it were. They were singing a song, they were praying this prayer that recounted God's faithfulness to them throughout the years. Nehemiah chapter 9 verse 38 closes and it says, "And because of all this," all of chapter 9, "because of all this, we make a sure covenant and we write it. Our leaders, our Levites, and our priests seal it." Because of what you've done, God, today, we make a written confession, a written covenant to you, a promise that is sealed by our leaders, our Levites, and our priests. Under the direction of Nehemiah and Ezra, the Jews understood that part of prioritizing your life correctly is living intentionally. This isn't just for high school students or high school graduates or college graduates. but they might particularly benefit from this. Part of prioritizing your life correctly is living intentionally. What the children of Israel did is they wrote down on a sealed manuscript their covenant with God. Church, that would not be a bad idea for us to do in our own homes when we get back to the house this afternoon. Write it down, your commitment to God or the priorities of your life, and display it somewhere. That's going to serve two purposes. It's going to prove your intentionality, but it's also going to have a level of accountability attached to it. It'll prove your intentionality, and will have a level of accountability with it. Be intentional with your priorities. Listen, if you don't get anything else from this morning, you will not accidentally live your life with the proper priorities. It will not happen by accident. I guarantee you, when the pressure is on, with the boss breathing down your neck, you will swap and change the priorities to better suit your needs or what you seem or what you think are your needs, rather than living by the priorities list that God has created in His Word. You will not have proper priorities by accident. I don't think that most Christians are trying to leave God out of their life. I really think that they're just not living intentionally. Every activity we do, every dime we spend ought to be run through the screening process, the filter of our priorities. But we don't do that because we've never really sat down and thought through what our life's priorities are. Do you know why most companies have their mission statement printed up and displayed somewhere in the office? I had to get my windshield replaced this week, and as I was sitting there waiting on them to finish up the job, they had this huge banner with their mission statement and all these subpoints underneath that, and I just thought, why in the world would you have spent the money to have that displayed? It's to serve as a reminder to the employees and a testimony to their customers of why they do what they do. In your home, display your priorities somewhere. So at that point, when you are neglecting or misplacing one of those, you will be held accountable. The children of Israel, they wrote it down, and they seal it or they sign it. In fact, verses 1 through 28, it's just a list of everyone who signed this piece of paper. 84 signatures in total, and as verse 28 details, there are many more who verbally agreed to live by this covenant. I'm not going to read verses 1 through 27. I have struggled enough through all of the names in Nehemiah. You can do it on your own. But just suffice it to say, 84 signatures on this covenant. Among these are blue collar and white collar, old and young, men and women. Verse 28 says it best: all who understood what the covenant said agreed to it. And in verse 9, it explains even more. It says, these joined with their brethren, their nobles, and entered into a curse and an oath to walk in God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord our Lord, and His ordinances and His statutes. They entered into a curse and an oath to walk in God's law. What does it mean when it says that they entered into a curse? Let me tell you what it doesn't mean. They don't use profanity here. They didn't invoke some magical spell against themselves. When Scripture says that they entered into a curse, it means that they knew and agreed to the consequences of defaulting on their promise to God. When you signed that contract to buy that house, to start that mortgage, you signed, in essence, a curse that says, what will happen if I default on my end of the bargain? You've got my house. That's exactly what the children of Israel are doing here. They sign a curse upon themselves, knowing full well all the responsibility that is on their heads, and they sign it. In Jewish culture, an oath was a little bit different from what we might say. It was the practical application of a promise. So here's what I mean by that. It was usually a gift of some kind to honor the agreement. So we might do a handshake. In their time, they might have given a gift of 7 lambs or something like that. There was some significance attached to the number 7 in an oath. We're not told what they gave or what they do, but most would agree that they probably made some kind of special sacrifice to God in an honor to the covenant. So that's what it means when it says they entered into a curse and an oath with God. They understood the repercussions if they did not hold up their end of the bargain, and they also sacrificed something of theirs so they would feel it then at that time as they wrote their name, as they signed the covenant. And this covenant, this written agreement to walk in God's law, detailed 3 areas in Jewish life that they would prioritize and make God the center of. It's crazy. This passage of Scripture was written over 2,400 years ago, but it is still so relevant today. Our first priority, we will make God the priority in our relationships. We will make God the priority in our relationships. Verse 30, they said, as part of this bargain, this covenant with God, we would not give our daughters as wives to the people of the land, nor take their daughters for our sons. That's the first one. We will make God the priority in our relationships. When the Israelites were walking back into Canaan, God told them not to intermarry with people of other nations. That's a law that has made many people claim that God is racist, but that's absurd. The law of not intermarrying with other nations was not one born out of racial issues, but of religious ones. Essentially, God didn't want any foreign gods in Israel. He's a jealous God, Scripture tells us. He is like no other. He wants none other celebrated and worshiped in Israel. And he knew that those false gods would be introduced if Israelites started marrying into heathen families. For those who were willing and wanting to repent of their false religions, they were always welcomed into Israel's family. We looked at that last week. We looked at the moms in Jesus' family. Many of those in his family lineage are Gentiles. They are those who gave up their culture, gave up their religion, and attached themselves to Judaism and to God. And so it's not a racial issue, it's a religious one. When Ruth left Moab and left the Moabite gods, she was more than welcome to come into Israel. That's not the issue. The issue is not racism here, it is religious. Paul brings the New Testament principle to light in 2 Corinthians chapter 6. What can we glean from them promising God that we will not intermarry with other nations? Again, not a racial issue, but a religious one. Paul brings it home in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14, when he says, "Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? What communion has light with darkness? And what accord has Christ with Belial or Satan? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people." We need to have God as the priority in our relationships. If a Christian, who Paul earlier calls the temple of God, marries or becomes one flesh, which is the biblical term, and speaking of marriage, with a non-Christian, it just doesn't make sense. Paul says it's like righteousness marrying lawlessness, light marrying dark, Christ marrying Satan. Do not marry someone who is not a Christian. To the world, that statement seems narrow and small-minded, but I want you to look at the state of the home today. Do not take their advice. They are not ones to talk. But in all of this, it's not an us versus them mentality. It's not a I'm so perfect Christian and you're a so evil unbeliever, but it's more than just the confusion that it causes when there's children that are brought into the picture. Marriage is by definition a man and a woman promising God that they will be faithful to each other. Here's the issue. If one doesn't believe in God that they are promising to, what good is the marriage covenant? If I swear by God, which is what we do in a court of law, it's a legal binding contract in our marriages. If I do that, yet I do not believe in the name of which I have just evoked, that is null and void. And so is the marriage contract. It makes no sense. Make Christ the center of your relationship, whether married or dating. By the way, you know the best way to make sure that you do not marry an unbeliever? It's not going to happen by accident, by the way. Don't date an unbeliever. Again, in all of this, it's not an us versus them. Praise God for the many stories in our own congregation of men who were told by their now wives who said, I'll date you, but you got to come to church, right? Some of you, you're nodding your heads. You were that guy. You came to Christ maybe primarily at first because you wanted a relationship with that girl, but it led into a much deeper relationship with your Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Make Christ the center of your relationship, whether married or dating. Here's what I mean by that. Talk of Him often. Pray for and with each other often. Attend church together. Serve alongside each other in ministry. Hold each other accountable. If it's gone a couple of days since you have prayed with your wife, oh man, Christian, we are in a horrible mess. Make Christ, make God the priority of your relationship. That's this first and foremost one. For years, the Israelites had forsaken this law, and now they're writing it out. They're saying, we will do what God says in our marriages. We will make Him the priority of our relationship. It's so overused that I even pause to use it, but you've probably seen in some setting the triangle and talking about a husband and a wife and God. If we were to put God at that pinnacle of the triangle, the only way that the husband and wife, the only way that that couple will grow closer is by growing closer to God. As they grow closer to God, they will look over and they will see that I've got a better relationship with my husband. I've got a more real relationship with my wife because of my relationship with God, but He must be the priority. Otherwise, you are set in that long part of the triangle to never have a close relationship with God, with each other. Our vertical relationship must be correct in order for us to have a correct horizontal relationship with other people. He must be the priority of our relationships. But now they move on to this second. They say, we will make God the priority in our finances. You knew it was coming. You knew it would happen at some point. Of course, he's going to talk about money. Verse 31, read it with me. If the peoples of the land brought wares or any grain to sell on the Sabbath day, we would not buy it from them on the Sabbath or on a holy day, and we would forego the 7th year's produce and the exacting of every debt. I want you to realize the difficulty in the covenant and the promise that they have just made with God. Here is Israel, a struggling country financially and in every other way. They have just rebuilt the walls. They're working on the infrastructure of their city. And in a world of trade where everyone when everyone did business on a 7-day week timetable, the nation of Israel has just promised God that they will only work 6. Saying that when people come into our city on the Sabbath day wanting to buy, sell, and trade, we will not take part in it. The observance of the Sabbath was a distinctly Jewish practice, Wiersbe says. He says the Gentiles around Jerusalem would treat the seventh day of the week like any other day and want to socialize and do business. While the Jewish Sabbath was not to be a day of bondage and misery, it was a day devoted to rest and contemplation of things spiritual. It was a weekly reminder to the nation that they were Jews and had a special calling in the world. Some of the Jewish merchants would be especially interested in getting business from the Gentiles, and to close up business on a day when people were shopping seemed a waste. God commanded them to set aside a day of restful worship, and they agreed that even opening their borders for trade on that day would encourage disobedience to that law. But more than just a day off a week, they also promised to live by the year of the Sabbath, which was a law given by God in Exodus chapter 23, verse 10. Essentially, and if you're a farmer, take notice of what they are promising God here, because it is mind-blowing. Essentially, they would work their fields for 6 years, but on the seventh, they would neither sow nor reap anything. Now, there's ecological benefits. Some of our ag graduates could tell you some of those, about giving the land a rest. But that doesn't make much sense when your children are hungry. For 6 years, they were to work the land, but on the seventh, they were to take a break. While they were supposed to be compiling and piling up food for that seventh, they were also supposed to be trusting God for that Sabbath year. But it gets more involved than that. They also said that they would enact the year of Jubilee. Essentially, every 49 years, all debts would be forgiven. You could have just taken out a loan, just taken out a mortgage 3 years ago, but if it fell upon the year of Jubilee, that debt was forgiven. I want to buy a house the day before the year of Jubilee begins, right? All of this was to set God as the priority over their finances. It took a lot of faith for the children of Israel to not deal and trade on the Sabbath 1 day a week. It took more faith to not farm every 7 years. And it is illogical in our mind to forgive all debts every 49 years. These laws were meant to teach one principle. It's not that God wants your money. God does not want your money to have you. God doesn't want to have your money. He doesn't want your money to have you. Our finances tell a lot about what we worship. If we looked solely at our bank account to see what we worship, it would be the gods of entertainment and sports and pleasure, not the one true God. So I say to the graduates, as you get jobs and you start careers, know that while we live in a world where cash is king, God's people are to live as though it is merely a tool to work for the kingdom. We don't live by a checking account. We live by faith. What I mean more real than anything is that you give God your PIN code. You give him your bank account. Every dime I make is yours, God. I hesitate to even mention food on a Sunday morning because I know you're all thinking about that right now, especially this kind of food. S. Truett Cathy is famous for starting the Chick-fil-A chain of restaurants. Famously, Cathy refused, and his children, who now run the company, honor this decision to not open any of their stores on Sunday. And he writes in one of his books, so that he and his employees could set aside 1 day to rest and worship if they choose. Some business specialists have agreed that if Chick-fil-A were to open on Sundays, they could assure well over $1 billion more a year. When Cathy was presented with some of those figures, he simply replied, "The day is more important than the dollar." Money and time go together so easily. And that's why, as quickly as the Israelites promised to make God the priority of their finances, they also promised our third priority. They said, we will make God the priority in our time. We will make God the priority in our time. Verse 32 says this, also we made ordinances for ourselves to exact from ourselves yearly 1/3 of a shekel for the service of the house of God. In layman's terms, in modern time, they said, yes, you can tax us. We will give more taxes to the temple. We do it willingly. From verses 32 through 39, the children of Israel, they agreed to pay 4 taxes to provide for the temple, the house of God. These taxes ranged from giving a tenth or a tithe, what we now call today a tithe, a tenth of their income to the temple for making sure that there was always wood for the priests to use in offering up sacrifices. Now, you might look at these verses 32 through 39, and think that they further explain prioritizing God in your finances. And they do. They give to the temple. They give to the house of God. But I also think that there is an underlying principle of prioritizing God in our time. True, they had already promised to rest on the 7th day, but here they are promising to not waste the day off. Read verse 39 with me. For the children of Israel and the children of Levi shall bring the offering of the grain, of the new wine and the oil to the storerooms, where the articles of the sanctuary are, where the priests who minister and the gatekeepers and the singers are. And focus in here. We will not neglect the house of God. We will not neglect the house of our God. You see, the principle of Sabbath rest, taking a day off, is not solely about rest. This might rub you the wrong way, but it doesn't matter. You're not observing the Sabbath if you just take a day off and go out on the lake. There's nothing evil about going out on the lake, but don't call it your Sabbath day rest. Because intricately involved in this day of rest is a day of restful worship, where the people of God promise, they covenant with themselves and with God, saying, we will not neglect the house of our God. You see, the early Christians, they changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. It was kind of a line in the sand. Judaism was Sabbath. Now Christianity is Resurrection Day. We observe Christ's resurrection every Sunday. This is our day of restful worship right here. This is what you're doing today. They did that not so that we could have a day of leisure, sport, entertainment for yourself. In doing that, I want you to understand, you are worshiping, and you are worshiping yourself. A day of restful worship spent apart from the people of God is a day of worshiping you. When we neglect the house of our God, we are saying that He is not worthy of our time. He is not worthy of our worship. You're like, Corey, I'm present. I'm here today. Why are you preaching to me? We need to be reminded often about the importance of gathering together and worshiping our King. So last year when I spoke to our graduates, I begged them to not graduate from church. This year, I want to ask you and our graduates, if there was a contract, if I literally had a piece of paper up here and I had it detailed, these 3 priorities, that we would make God the priority of our relationships, that we would make God the priority of our finances, and that we would make God the priority of our time. It detailed all those. Would you sign it, knowing that you do not enter idly into a contract with the Creator of the universe? There is many a warning in Scripture to just signing your name and walking by. The children of Israel, they mean it, at least for the time being. We'll see in the future that they depart from it. But could you sign that covenant, that contract with God? I will make you the priority of my relationships. I will make you the priority in my finances, and I will make you the priority in my time. It might not always make sense. It might mean ridicule from everyone who is doing life differently. It might cause you to sacrifice a lot of things that you really enjoy doing, but it is worth it, Christian. To the graduates, in closing, up until now, many, if not most of you, have lived off of the borrowed faith and priorities of your parents. What your parents thought was worth your time, guess what? You spent time doing that. If they found worth in going to church, they probably dragged you along. And praise God for that. You have, for the most part, lived off the borrowed priorities, the borrowed faith of your parents. But now you are making more and more decisions of your own. You are choosing your own path. My plea is to choose God. Prioritize God over everything else in your life. And start with your relationship. Start with your finances. And start with your time. Will you bow with me?